All right, nearly there.
There we go. All right. I got a notice that it's being live streamed.
Perfect.
All
Off we
right,
go.
off we go. Thanks for being here, folks. We're waiting for some other commissioners to show up, but we can go ahead and start. I call to order this October 28th, 2021 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:05 p.m. First item on our agenda is citizens to be heard. Do we have any citizens to be heard?
We do not have anybody in the waiting room and did not receive any comments prior to our meeting.
All right. Okay, the next agenda item is our public hearing this evening. For those who are hoping to join, who are watching on YouTube, there is a dial-in number. There's also a Zoom meeting link that is available on the city's agenda page. Also, you can always email the Planning Commission with any comments. Our public hearing is a possible recommendation of Draft Ordinance 2021-18, an ordinance amending the Moab Municipal Code with clarifying language identifying prohibited LED and LCD display technologies and amending the MMC with clarifying language identifying exempt, temporary, and prohibited signs, and amending the MMC sign code definitions and relocation of section 15.44 sign code to new section 17.93 sign code with incorporation of generally duplicated sections into consolidated sections. All right. I think it would make the most sense to probably run through everything and then allow any public comment if anyone hops on at the end. Does that make sense with you, Corey? So I will now open the public hearing at 6:06 p.m. And then we'll have Corey give us a presentation. And then if there's anyone who's on hoping to call in or Zoom in, we'll keep an eye on that too. Corey, you are muted, my friend.
Yeah, almost got out of the woods on that. No, we'll let that delay on the YouTube carry through a little bit. Hopefully we'll get some folks that, if they're wanting to comment, have time to get on. In the meantime, I do have a presentation with, you'll see from that previous Planning Commission meeting, that content that we had gone through. I'm just going to quickly revise what that discussion included. There we go. Really what we're looking at is a development code text amendment, specifically surrounding sign code in the various areas within our municipal code that exist both in Title 17 and Title 15. The components of what this ordinance include are relocation of the main bulk of sign code from Title 15 to Title 17. And then based off of the recommendation from the commission last time, rather than just strictly relocating and duplicating some language, we incorporated sign code language from various parts of 17 into what some of those standing more substantial sections in Title 15 said. An example of that would have been your generally signs or general provision signs. So we just made a general provision section with areas from 17 and 15 collaborated, and that's expressed in that draft ordinance. Part two was getting into specific language amendments in that ordinance. For looking at clarifying language prohibiting LED and LCD display technologies. Coming off of the Grand County's clarification and within their land use code, making consistent language on that side and adopting that into our section that references that. And then also amending our exempt, temporary, and prohibited signs areas in connection with code compliance and how we've had some holes in what definitions of existing signage might have been and how it was interpreted. So getting a better consistency on how we define things, therefore better enforce and permit for those people that are trying to use those signs. We have a mechanism to actually permit them. So it's not all just about prohibiting things, but allowing people to do things in a way that makes sense. Oops. Oh dear. Okay, and again, the general background is where we've come to with Christina Sloan at the county, contacting the city, recommending our sign code update. And then since we've looked at addressing that, consolidating those places and clarifying. Pretty straightforward. If you remember from that last agenda summary title, we did not have to include all of these numbers. I remember Kaya and Jesso had to, or I think maybe it was Britton, had to enumerate all those where we don't have to anymore because we've incorporated sections rather than duplicating those sections in Title 17. What we had looked at previously was this small section about the included language for display technologies, LED and LCD. Prohibited signs, we included discussion about what had been termed blade signs and has been updated as feather type signs in our new ordinance to better convey what is more commonly described. And then also do have a section that for anybody that does call them a blade sign, they're in there as well. Our discussion about sales or special event signs being free and allowed for 30 days, making enforceable language for banners basically around town that they couldn't just be up indefinitely. We discussed political signs, permitting or not permitting those. We moved forward, and this has been with discussion and may potentially change when we come to city council with a staff recommendation beyond this, but believe that at this point, political signs are really just a acknowledgement form for candidates that they need to follow the rules. So really the permitting process is not necessary for those, and we're gonna move forward, I believe, in that direction. All right, so jumping over now, excuse me, to the draft ordinance. So this that we're seeing here was included in the packet as Exhibit 1 draft ordinance. We'll quickly go through this language. It's red, so it should be fairly clear as to what language is being added or deleted through this strike through type visual. But this very first section, sorry, it's very little, moves basically our sign code Title 15 to a new sign code in Title 17 located 17.93. That's easy move, pretty clear what we're doing there. Getting onto some of the specific language. This is that section 2 here is that section of where we incorporated language. So took what was generally language from Title 17, which was somewhat redundant, and worked it into the other Title 15 language, if that makes sense, being the more substantial sign code. So areas that were not necessary were eliminated, and then areas here were added. So basically I took what elements from that Title 17 were relevant and plugged them in. Most of it is just context. There really wasn't much new information. It was setting the parameters in which we can govern signs based on this section. So that includes a general provisions section, a signs in residential zones, which we did not even need to add text. It was it mirrored each other, so there was no need to add any language. Setbacks computation. We ended up adding this, which was actually the same language you can see, but it was just formatted in a different way that we adopted the more comprehensive language. Permit required. This was actually more robust in the Title 17. So this is the bulk of that Title 17 with what was limited in that Title 15. So again, just incorporating language there. So that sums up section 2 of the changes. Within that, there was in the Title 17 group of languages, there was this additional section called Permitted Illumination to New Sign Code. Oh, excuse me. Permitted Illumination is the name of it. And we were incorporating that into the new sign code because that was a section that stood on its own from Title 17 that didn't already have a place in Title 15. So this will continue the way it was. And all we're doing is changing the location of this. Okay, so before I go much further, do I have any comments on the sections we've discussed so far, 1 through 3?
None here.
Pretty straightforward.
Oh, it looks like Becky is joining us. Becky, can you hear us? Okay, we may just continue. It looks like Becky is just connecting to audio here, but Becky, if you can't hear us, we are working through, in our agenda packet, we're on to the public hearing, going through the sign code and walking through what the proposed ordinance draft looks like. So no questions on 1 through 3 so far. On section 4 here is where we started adding language and getting something outside of what already existed. So of course we're moving the section here, incorporating this limited language on LED and LCD. At the end of this conversation, I might include a staff recommendation that's come up as a part of this ordinance and working with code compliance, is that there is language in here within this first section that essentially prohibits ticker signs or moving signs. But what had historically fallen into that category and is identified here, and by extension could suggest or interpret in one direction, that including time and temperature signs, lamp banks, and intermittent displays, under the concept that they turn on and off or change. What is a different part of the code, it seems to be permitted, are fuel price, how are they defined? Illuminated fuel price signs. So at gas stations, as you've seen probably many places, what used to be typically a cabinet sign that would be a hand roller or some sort of large internally illuminated cabinet is being converted to an LED light. While that meets some sections of the code, we want to ensure moving forward that we are either permitting those types of signs or prohibiting them based on certain findings, that it kind of lives in this gray area. So I've proposed new language tonight that the Planning Commission can adopt in addition to what this draft ordinance is, through a modified motion to allow that. So we can go over that language a little bit later, but just want to get through the bulk of this first. So moving on to section 5 here. Add prohibited sign type language to new section, add temporary signs and sign definitions. So what we're seeing here, of course, is the change of location, but then also our feather type signs, with the one condition of they are permitted if they are secured to a permitted display apparatus. So the concept behind that, the concerns of the Planning Commission at our previous meeting, saying, well, what about those small commercial businesses, food trucks, for example, or small vendors that need that attention? And that is where permitted display apparatuses come in. So we're protecting them being able to do that. But on a general sense, any other property with a large frontage shouldn't be necessarily incorporating those. That's where we're at now, that they are prohibited, as well as prohibited language referencing back to the intermittent signs. So just doubling down on basically video billboards is what we're trying to prohibit there. Temporary signs, the amendment here is that of the 30 days for an event or sale sign for no fee, but would just be permitted. That way we can track how long those signs are actually up and displayed for. gives us a little bit more help with the code enforcement of those. This is language that you hadn't seen in the prior discussions with that political sign. So changing the political campaign signs shall not require a permit, and then just eliminating that section that says that they do require a permit. So they'll still sign a piece of paper. They'll still have to follow and comply with all the rules that apply to a political sign, not being displayed in a right of way, limited to a certain size, but they'll be governed much in the way we govern real estate signs. So that makes, again, our code enforcement much easier, where it's not an excessive permit that we're putting in. And then again, language changes that we're incorporating is I put an added number here rather than a number. I'm not sure where our recorder or how we would like to implement that into definitions. I mean, assuming it's going to be in F for feather type sign, but wasn't sure where to sneak that number. But means a temporary sign with a my speech is not good tonight. Means a temporary sign with flexible fabric attached to one side of a rigid or flexible pole, generally in the shape of a feather or similar shape, with or without text, which is used primarily for advertising or attention getting, and then also known as blade sign. That was an element that Nora wanted to include as well. So that wraps up the complete draft ordinance as we have it now. And if I might, before we close out the discussion, move over to this, which is just a replica draft ordinance, but does have that included information for fuel price signs here. So it's under that intermittent light and flashing moving lights prohibited section, but would have a section B under that section A, where it does vaguely discuss where things may or may not be prohibited. So time clocks and temperatures. The reason those are so clearly prohibited is because they change every minute, or even more so with temperature dependently, is that you are producing a changing, flashing to a degree sign. With these fuel price signs, it's a static sign only with numeral digits. It doesn't have a ticker that says coffee, open. It's can only be digits. I had coordinated information with Yesco Signs, who often work on many of these, and they've given us contact information for the actual industries that build these and actually work on the engineering for how they function. But as an industry standard, was able to kind of understand what the best operating standards are. That in some of the fears of permitting this, well, what if they're too bright? What if they're all these things? They said the industry standards should take care of that, but you could put these blocks in that would be feasible, but also I think in line with what our intention is. And the reason being dark sky complaints is that currently cabinet signs are permitted, internally illuminated cabinet signs. So a large cabinet sign, what would be permitted is a large 3 to be illuminated, but with the background being black. What we often see now is a large illuminated sign where it's all blue, and that's illuminated, plus an illuminated 3. So the dark sky code has reduced it to just the 3 being illuminated, but that type of light still can be distributed differently than what we can with LED, controlling the level of light that's coming out in that lumen amount. And if we want to get into the foot candles area, we could. But what was provided here and proposed is, I think, could be a generally accepted option for us in the zoning code, keep it tangible to us. So illuminated fuel price signs shall be permitted if they comply with the following standards. Operate with auto dimming from 70% full brightness during daylight hours to a 15% brightness, and that should be full brightness, 15% of full brightness during nighttime hours. Display will include numerical digits only, excluding time, temp, displays, or other. We can add other or etc. to identify it's just numbers. And then the interval of change would be permitted once every 12 hours, so twice a day, which is a standard for those fuel type that they actually can change 2 to 3 times a day to keep the most consistent prices of what you're actually paying for fuel. But I think twice a day seems, the brightness was also 15 to 20%. So I think keeping it at 15, which is the lower end, and then 2, which is the shorter end numbers of interval changes, would be appropriate. We could certainly change that to once a day. They get 1 price per day. How accurate that will be will, obviously fluctuate a little bit, but the idea is we're not creating flashing signs that change every minute or every half hour or so. So that's the additional language that in my discussions with Nora seems consistent with the dark sky code, and then seems like an elaboration on this intermittent light and flashing side. It's a middle ground where we weren't sure where we want to go. So maybe it's a discussion planning commission can have where we absolutely hate them and we don't want them. Okay, and we'll prohibit those. But the only other alternative that we have right now are cabinet signs, which is kind of, you got to pick which one you want. Big cabinet signs that aren't really restricted, or we can restrict these illuminated LED with certain dimming capacities. So that's really my presentation. That's our next presentation. So I'll stop sharing and we can see, it doesn't look like anybody else has joined the waiting room. And I have not received any emails inquiring. So I would say we do not currently have anybody waiting to speak for the public hearing.
Okay, in that case, I will now close the public hearing at 6:27 p.m. Now comes the time of the possible recommendation of the draft ordinance for us to discuss. Does anyone have any questions for Corey? Any thoughts about anything? I think this all makes good sense to me. Just kind of there's a lot of holes in our code right now, things missing, and it's nice to not have ambiguity for property owners and business owners and for the city. So I think it's great.
I say we ban any lighting on any signs and just require gas stations to use marquees. I think it'll bring new jobs to the area, and that's my proposal.
I like it. We're going the Wrigley Field route.
I second the notion.
No, great put together and pretty cool for reaching out to Yesco. But
Sorry, I was taking notes.
It looks like Becky is having trouble unmuting, so Becky, if you can hear us, I don't think I have the ability to unmute you. I can ask to unmute you. I don't know how to grab you there.
Yeah, I think
So
you can only
Becky,
ask.
if you want to text me your concern, but it looks like all I can do is ask to unmute you. It's telling Becky it needs my permission. Well, it's weird.
Weird.
Let's see. Are you on your, oh, looks like audio's connecting for Becky. Nope, maybe no dice. Okay.
Shoot.
Anyway.
Becky, if you want to call me or text me, I can tell people what you want to say. I'm sorry we're having these issues. Aha, she's calling me. Hold on. I'm going to mute myself. Stand by.
Corey, what part of which exhibit is the LED lighting part? I'm not finding that on the amended.
The exhibit for the LED, it's not going to be its own exhibit, but within the title section, it's.
Hey, I've got, sorry to interrupt. I have Becky on speakerphone. I'm going to let her speak just because this is complicated and strange. Sorry to interrupt you guys.
Go ahead.
Okay, Becky, here, I'm holding you next to my microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that works.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I joined a little bit late, but I did have some questions about the like LED and illuminated signs and windows. Is this like anybody's sign that is any kind of light in a window is not permitted? I think it was section C. And even more specifically, like in my window at my office, I have like a backlit display for our listings. Is this something that would be considered not permitted?
I believe it would.
I'm trying to understand if it's specific only to fuel or anybody that has a lighted sign in their window.
Right. So that's part of the base code that exists already. So if they are, and I'm familiar with what you're talking about, those are changeable TV displays, LCD, basically. Those would be prohibited under our current
And
code,
I can't
even
hear Corey at all
without.
anymore.
Oh,
Can you hear me
hold on a second.
on your own phone?
Hold on, let me undo headphones. Okay. Say that again, Corey.
But does that sound okay?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. Yes, I'm familiar with what you're talking about. And those would be considered LCD, LED display screens. So under our current base code, even without the current language, those would be prohibited, those type signs that you're talking about. So basically TVs put up against your window or computer screens that are put up against your window are not compliant.
They're not TVs or screens. It's just a flyer with an illuminated background.
Yeah, so that's like a backlit sign is what she's talking about, Corey.
That's static, right? And we're banning or essentially prohibiting moving, correct? Or things that change?
Yeah, I can pull up the ordinance exactly, and we can kind of look at what that is. I fall into the idea of lamp banks that change electronically. So if the image is a piece of paper that's behind a light, that might be considered differently. But if it's a screen that displays something, is prohibited.
Yeah, so I think it's just like a flyer, like a real estate listing flyer that's just on a backlit board, essentially, just so you can see it better in the evening.
Yes.
Right. And so that might not be an intermittent sign. That might be more of a dark sky. And we could look at that.
And then what about people that have like signs in their windows that are like in the shape of a coffee cup, or even their open signs with their hours on them? Are they not going to be allowed to have those signs on?
No, those would be permitted. Those are specifically exempt illuminated signs. So it's the concept of it being a TV or not. If it
Is
I'm
moving.
looking back.
Yeah.
If it's moving or is changeable. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically you can still have two illuminated window signs as long as they aren't something that's moving, like a picture, it's just not like a screen with like flashing different ads on it or something like that.
Right.
It
Yeah.
does very clear in the code because it says backlit. It says and or backlit LED signs. So that's why I was confused about that.
Right. I mean, what that signage is basically you're describing a internally illuminated cabinet sign on a small scale level.
Yeah.
So even with that sheet of paper, you're creating an illuminated box. Which is not permitted in the dark sky code, which is a different section, which is also where we got into the fuel price material, where there's one code that's permitting something and the other side code is prohibiting it, and you're trying to navigate where that line is. So cabinet signs are not permitted. You can have text or signage or logos shine through an internally illuminated cabinet sign, but full signage cannot shine through. So if you had a coffee cup, like neon light or an open neon light, those are exempt. And there's also some, I think, size requirements to some of that information as well. But generally, if it's a box of light protruding outward, that does not comply with dark sky. It will not mean anything to this intermittent light and flashing signs. But if it's not an internally illuminated box light cabinet sign and it's just a computer screen, that's also not permitted as a part of this other side of the ordinance. So they both deal with signage, lighting, displays, but they are two different sections. Both of those seem to say no digital display screens and no internally illuminated cabinet signs.
I see.
Yeah. So are you saying that like what Becky has right now doesn't comply with dark sky code necessarily? Well, I mean, I don't photo.
Yeah, we'd have to look at that and see based on what it is, what the square footage is. I think also contributes to that. There's exemptions for things under 2 square feet. I think there's about 6 of those postings like that. Yeah, we would just have to analyze that.
Yeah, because I know what they're talking about. I know there's placeholders in the ordinance right now for images. Man, I would sure like those images in before we forward a positive recommendation. I just feel like that would help having examples. Was that the plan all along, Corey, or?
Within which section in particular are you talking about?
Like I'm looking, for example, on page 4 of the draft ordinance or the proposed ordinance, it says permitted and prohibited external sign lighting configurations image. I assumed that meant there was going to be examples or something like that. I feel like examples.
That,
yeah, it would be really
yes,
useful
that does.
Like Becky's correct. There are parts that are not quite clear, and I know the whole reason we're doing this is so it's not so confusing or discretionary or appearing discretionary on part of the city.
Right.
Just for clarity. And man, I feel like that would help.
Those images do exist already,
Okay.
but because this is a draft ordinance, we did not include that content that already exists in there.
Yeah.
So that particular image is basically, if you think about spotlights that shine down on a sign, that's what it's showing in that particular section.
Okay. So wait, say that again. Spotlights that shine down on a sign.
So yeah, most signs that are not internally illuminated are externally illuminated. And in that scenario, they would be illuminated from the top with a fixture that is pointed directionally down towards the sign. But there's also a distinction of where it's placed on an elevation to the sign. So if it's too high, that light will trespass over the sign and then illuminate above a horizontal degree up. If it's at the sign or at the top, we're using my head in this image as the sign and my hand as the light fixture would be, or if it's below that, it's also compliant. But if it's above, where my hand disappears, it's the light is passing over the sign. That is prohibited. That's what that image identifies.
Corey, I just found an image of the outside of Bird and Co. I'm going to send you the link for it so we can talk specifically about that, because I'm curious about what Becky's asking as well.
Right.
I just sent you that link over email.
Okay.
May I see this as well?
Yeah, if you'd share your screen, Corey, that'd be great.
Okay.
I love this
All right.
high tech, low tech we're doing tonight.
Let's get a little closer. So I have it pulled up.
Okay.
I think that's as close as I'm gonna be able to get it without losing operation of Zoom. So let's give that a shot.
Okay. Becky, you can see, right, on the screen?
So this is as close as I can go to here.
Okay.
How does that look?
Cool. Yeah. So at night, Becky, I assume the top is illuminated, right? The Bird and Co. logo.
The entire sign lights up. They're all connected electronically.
Okay. But the images are just images. They're not like screens.
They're just pieces of paper.
Yeah.
Semi-transparent printed on.
So Corey, would this be okay under what's in the new code?
With us dealing with intermittent light, it would be permitted. Under dark sky, I'm not sure that this would be permitted.
I would just have to turn it off at night, basically.
Okay.
Or yeah, basically, or adjust to what is being displayed.
Okay.
So that basically the logo, Bird and Co., that could be illuminated at full. Signage, this is not typically what we see. So we would have to analyze what that means within the code. Typically, if we see illumination in windows, it's exempt under 2 square feet.
Okay.
If it's over 2 square feet, it counts towards the signage of the property. And that is in our code kind of right now of how we're trying to deal with prohibited and exempt or not exempt, whatever it is. But images are not a part of your sign.
Yeah.
What was it? What did Becky say?
Here, Becky.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So that's something else I wanted to bring up, just like in my experiences through, having a business and moving to different locations and applying for sign permits, that always has seemed really odd to me in our code is like, you can kind of see my neighbor next door to me, Scarlet Rocks Salon. So you can have a giant sticker in your window and it doesn't count toward any of your sign square footage, but a hanging sign, or I didn't even realize this until tonight, but I guess my illuminated signs count toward square footage, as well as like if I did a mural on the side of the building, any like lettering, that would count toward signage. It just seems a little inconsistent and strange to me that a sticker is considered different than other types of signs.
Right. And it is laid out in the code. And again, this code is has been existing. That the reason I'm saying that is that, we're working through with what our understanding of that code is. And then a lot of these display types that we're seeing are new. They didn't exist when some of these provisions were written. So for example, with
Stickers.
the stickers, the Red Rock signs. So imaging does not count towards your sign illumination. So for example, if you've been by, say like a particular barbecue restaurant that's newer, and they have a LED, cabinet, not a cabinet, a channel lettering pig. That pig does not count towards their signage. Same thing with murals. Imagery does not count. If you look at a particular Mexican restaurant on Main Street, there's a big mural out there. They got a sign permit for just the text section. So only the text applies, not the whole wall mural. Because signage really only applies to the advertising for your business. Products, like you might see if it's under 2 square feet and it's a beer sign in a window, that's a product. It's under 2 square feet. It would not be its own sign permit. So name, and this is in part of the exempt section. So name plating, things like that, addressing are also exempt in that section. So what they did on their door there, we would not need a sign permit for that. For Bird and Co., if we look, there's that hanging sign right here. So this window sign, we likely would need a sign permit for this, given it's over 2 square feet and it's clearly their main signage in the window. We would need a sign permit for the hanging sign. If this were under 2 square feet, would not need it. If it were over 2 square feet, we would. Images would not need a sign permit. They would need to comply with dark sky as lighting. Sometimes, as it's attached to a sign, that would be why I'm being vague about this. Is this internally illuminated signs in the building? So we can't govern what goes on in a structure as far as illumination as a part of the the dark skies code. So you could have a light, in theory, pointed directly out of your window. At this point, we can't govern that. That's what's called lantern effect. That is a somewhat challengeable, onerous type of code. Some people are proposing that. It gets challenged quite a bit about, you're going to tell me where I can put a lamp or not put a lamp. So we've stayed away from that. That's in the sky code. But if we were going to call this a sign, which it is close to because it is advertising, it's not advertising specifically for this business, but it's advertising components of that business. Are we evaluating this as a sign? Therefore, does it need to comply with the internally illuminated sign, i.e. cabinet signs? So you can see my line of thinking. I didn't want to give any particular yes or no, because there are conditions under which we would interpret certain things. And while we do want to have the code as clear as possible for as many options of things as possible, but there will always be somebody next week that's going to come in that's somewhere between the lines. And if we make code, and we've said this all along, that addresses every single situation, it would be just too excessive for us to handle how big that code would be, and then all the micro changes amongst that. So I hope that kind of gets at least some understanding of where we are in the planning department and how we try to really promote the property owner's rights within what the code. That's our job. Promote what you're permitted to do, what you're allowed to do, but also protect other your neighbor's property rights as far as what prohibited things we have. And that's where it's this kind of balance of dance of what's the intention and what does it really fall into. So with those real estate signs, the question is, I think we'd have to look at it and determine, is it a sign or is it internal lighting?
That was really informative, Corey. Thanks. So it sounds like, no, for real. It sounds like for the purposes of the code amendments that we're considering tonight and the code additions, no, that would not be something that is prohibited under that.
It appears right now it would fall into the sign category as a part of an internally illuminated sign rather than, it's meant to advert out towards the street and it is illuminated. That's what I'm basically seeing. So we're interpreting it in that category versus dark sky, which is just exterior outdoor lighting, is
Cool.
dealing with illumination. Yeah. We can go on, but yeah, that's where that kind of gets
not prohibited, because it's essentially a part of being inside of the business. It's not advertising to go there. You see things, but you only look at them once you're there. Is that kind of the idea?
Almost, I mean, I think it's almost, we're going the other way where that is geared directly outside. So you wouldn't be inside looking at these screens. So if those were 6 feet back from the window, it could be argued that's an internal illumination of the interior. What they're done is stuck up right against the glass projecting directly outwards and they're illuminated. So like Becky said, well, what if we turn them off at night at a certain time? Well, that seems to comply with some of the dark sky standards.
Skies.
Yeah, let's
But
not. I don't want to get off on a dark.
Well, it
sky.
changes that sign from a because it is both. That's my point. That no longer becomes a illuminated sign at night. It's just imagery. So if Becky turned those off at night, that would be compliant currently.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I was more
if
questioning the square footage. Like, is it a part of sign? Like, is it a sign?
No.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think we would. It would be a part of the sign, but not the one that we're going to count the square footage and count on. Good question. That was a good point.
Because it's a part of it. You're okay.
It's like the pig. It's signage, but we're counting it.
Becky, do you have any other questions while I have you on the phone or comments?
Maybe this is just for another time, but I think we need to look at like the amount of square footage that's allotted and see how it applies to different types of buildings, whether they front a right of way, whether they don't. Is it like a strip mall type scenario? I just think our code doesn't really work for all the different types of properties that we have, and it's a little too restrictive. So,
okay. We can certainly look.
Yeah, I mean that may actually really make sense to me, particularly because we have the dark skies code that's in place now, and a lot of the reasons you wouldn't want signs to be bigger are issues with light trespass and visibility and stuff like that. But if every sign, regardless of how big it is, has to comply with the dark sky code, if it's an exterior lit anything, it seems like it might actually make good sense to amend our overall sign code on sizing now that we have those other sort of restrictions to sort of allow things that make sense that now we know for sure aren't going to have those auxiliary issues as well.
I mean, for plazas, Becky brought that up. We do have sign code that addresses that, and it's actually a pretty favorable, healthy amount of allocation where you're getting a lot. I don't want to say double the signage, but if you're a plaza, you get oodles and noodles compared to some other folks. But yeah, Julie, your frontage, the idea was if you're a smaller business, yes, you get less signage, which may not be fair, but then you get to, if we allowed the maximum square footage for everyone, somebody's signage in theory could be bigger than their actual frontage. They could sign. So it's a scaling mechanism. So we can certainly look at that, but yeah, small frontages is because you can only conceivably fit so much on there that wouldn't be excessive or getting into the billboard area. Whereas bigger lots have more ability to disperse those signs, where we do have a maximum of 160 square feet per individual sign, with a maximum on highway signs or highway lots for 265 square feet per lot. So most of our big hotel lots, the frontage well exceeds that, but they're limited to that amount.
Corey, to like, it's hard when you're in like a little tiny skinny space. Like when I was on Main Street, like I basically had the width of a door to my office because it was upstairs. It's hard it doesn't fit for every type of commercial property. So. Right.
Yeah.
And that's, I think when they drafted this, that was their scaling mechanism they chose was frontage. I think in some cases it does work well. In other cases, like you're referring to, it doesn't seem to be adequate or fair, really. So if you have 10 foot of frontage and then, which is very small, a 10 square foot sign and that space can be quite large. I mean, it's achievable but it's, if you're doing offsite signage, anyway, that's in the weeds, certainly, but we can look at mechanisms that you guys might entertain.
Yeah.
What
As someone
you
who has
guys might
tried
think work.
tried and failed to find businesses that were upstairs somewhere on Main Street. A little bit more signage might be nice sometimes.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other comments or questions, Becky, while I have you on audio?
No, that's it.
Cool. Awesome. I guess so then if Becky doesn't have audio when we vote, maybe I'll just leave you on here and mute you and then unmute you when the time comes.
I could just do a thumbs up with these little
Oh, you can do that. Okay, cool.
raise my hand. I don't know.
Yeah. Becky will indicate if it's a yay. Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna hang up. Okay, cool. Thanks for making that work, everyone. So where were we? Any other questions, folks? It'll be good to have examples in, I think, for sure. In whatever we're talking about, Corey.
Yeah, and that's it's one of those elements I think we'd like to include a lot more, but there is, if we're designing those, are those images sufficient, or do we need to hire somebody to draft them? That's the question, but I think we want images on a lot of stuff for sure.
Yes, we do. Okay, so as you all know, we can. Ooh. Do we have a proposed motion somewhere?
It should be in the packet on the agenda summary.
It is not.
Shoot, let me see really quick. Let's see if I have it.
Can I just move to forward a positive motion of ordinance 2021-18 with the proposed amendments discussed tonight?
Let's make that a little more sophisticated and see what I might request. Sorry about that. It doesn't seem that there was a recommendation in the file that I have. I was certain that we included it, but maybe not. The recommendation would be on the draft ordinance that was presented with the changes that were reviewed. And then if you would like to amend that draft ordinance with the added language for fuel price signs, I think that would be sufficient to positively recommend what we just saw and discussed.
Say that again.
That we would forward a positive recommendation for the draft ordinance 2021-18 that was proposed this evening with the included language regarding fuel price signs added to that draft ordinance.
Are you wanting someone to second the notion?
Well, I can't make the
Corey
motion.
can't make. Corey
Someone
can't make the
propose
motion.
it.
Okay, so we're wanting to repeat that.
I will go ahead and forward a positive motion on what are we on with a positive motion for ordinance 2021-18. I got tongue tied.
You're muted now, Ruben. Ruben, you were muted.
Yep,
Yep.
I did it.
Give it one more try.
So we got half a motion there, Ruben.
I move to forward a positive motion on ordinance 2021-18, an ordinance amending the Moab Municipal Code regarding the sign code changes we discussed tonight with the inclusion of the fuel sign changes also discussed tonight.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second it.
Okay, we have a second from Luke. Any discussion before we vote? Okay, we will do a roll call vote. Becky will indicate via reaction of some sort. If it's a yay. Okay, Becky voted yay.
Becky votes yay. Ruben?
Aye.
Britt?
Aye.
Aye. Luke?
Aye.
And Kaya.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you.
5 votes. Aye, passes.
All right.
Did we yeah, we closed the public hearing. Okay.
Yes, we did. Okay, next item is a discussion item on potential amendments to the residential zones in Moab to require workforce housing. So Corey will give us a summary of what the city council passed based on some discussions had by a few planning commission members, city council, and city staff regarding incentivizing new workforce housing units in new developments in town. Corey, take it away.
All right. So this was a resolution passed by City Council that is enacting the pending ordinance doctrine regarding, and as Kaya said, the consideration for amending requirements in the R3 and R4 zone for developments of more than 2 households, which is what qualifies as our multi-household use. So an additional requirement within that multi-household use. The ordinance was left basically, or the resolution was left basically in that structure, which is pretty limited. What is necessary for the pending ordinance doctrine is that you establish what is basically the main bones, or in this case, singular, a bone of what the ordinance will include. And then from there, any proposed developments coming in after that resolution date will have to comply with that proposed element, the singular bone. Any additional meat that is added to that will be required at the time of the ordinance, or if there's an additional resolution, I believe, to substantiate on what the current singular content of that is. And what that content is in general terms at this time, because right now in the agenda packet, we shared what the city council moved on, and it was fairly vague. But what it is that we're identifying is that multi-household developments from this point on will have to provide of the development 33% or a third of those units will have to be dedicated to active workforce housing, which will be a defined term through, I believe, our ADU ordinance that will hopefully go through, or we'll need to add that term to our definitions prior to this resolution being in place in a substantial effect. So we need to identify what that is we're requiring it to, which active workforce housing, if we really break it down to something simple, it's local housing. This is in a response to a significant uptake in development of our R3 and R4 zones, specifically for the use of townhomes and condos, mostly in the vein of luxury townhome or condos. And that's a vague term used by some developers or even real estate agents, designed mostly and geared towards second home owners, not geared towards a local market. It is, of course, available to a local market, but not in a context that I think we're seeing actually activated within those residents. Many of the lots that are being used for that type of development, and we've discussed this before, and I think there are some images that have been shared as well about current proposed and conceptual projects, with a good portion of those in the R3, some R4, and then even some in the C4 general commercial zone, which we're not addressing at this time, that are removing current affordable units from our community and replacing them with high end or higher level pricing for housing at a rate that not only are we not getting more affordable housing into the community, we're at the same time reducing our available affordable stock and increasing our less affordable stock. So this is a reactionary response to putting some sort of mechanism in that will at least protect that if there's development, there is going to be a component. So this, and there's a lot of communication and questions we've got in the planning department. This does not include an affordability mechanism. It does not require, what were some of the other questions? I'm sure you guys can come up with them, but one of the major ones, of course, was an affordability component. So what this is, they can market rate, they would just have to be restricted. Oh, excuse me. The other one was the occupancy versus the ownership. So much like the HO, there were, I believe, both a affordability component and an ownership component. We are only dealing with occupancy. You can be a primary resident in that home, but it must be your primary residence, which is the definition of primary dwelling, is a tax code definition. You live there, that's your first home, that's where you live. This would allow you to have it be a second home, or a home that the primary owner, the owner of the property, does not live on, but they would have to lease it to a active workforce person, or local for short, which has some redundancies because we've currently prohibited rental in residential zones. Therefore, it's kind of somewhat of a set of redundancy that if you're renting, the idea is you would be on a monthly rate, or at least within your allotted rental time, that you are living here. So it's somewhat redundant to say you're renting and you're local. Well, that's kind of obvious, but there are some ways and functions that folks have been able to get around the nightly rental component while still renting it out nightly, but they're doing it on a month-to-month basis. So this deed restriction gives us a little more advantage to say, nope, it has to be a local that's residing there. So that it's trying to stay pretty high level, which is kind of where it's at right now. This was, I think, planned to be a discussion about how we'd like to move forward with any meat onto this particular bone. So an explanation of the resolution, but then starting to draft what it is this new ordinance would look like and what additional components, if any, we want to add. So at the moment, without Nora, was going to be Nora's discussion item, I don't know if I can contribute much more as to the direction we might go, but certainly open up to the commission and discuss what your thoughts are about this. And as we approach this going forward, what we as staff can supply to make better communication and discussion the next time we bring it up.
Yeah, I'm inclined to keep it short, just because we do have a commissioner who I think is an important voice in this conversation who can't actually speak right now because of our technological issues. And I don't want to exclude Becky from that conversation. I think my quick inclination is just that keep it as simple as humanly possible. I don't want this to become some like super convoluted code that's difficult to understand. I like it if I understand the impetus to do multiple fixes or tweaks or revisions while we're sort of already in there playing around. But I think for this particular thing, it might make the most sense if we don't, because I remember talking to Nora, for example, stuff about like open space requirements came up just within that zone. I just don't think this is the place for that. I would rather have that be separate. And then this just be, if you build over X number of units in these specific zones, this exact percentage needs to be restricted to workforce housing, local housing, done at XYZ. So
one of Becky's questions on that, just since that was a great point, when I communicated Becky was yesterday, was where, what does that mean if there are 4 units? And it's a third of that. So when you have a split unit, so to speak, of that percentage that it requires 1 point something, what happens then? That's a
Round up.
an interesting comment. If it's below 0.5 of the calculation, do we round down? If it's above 0.5, do we round up? That would likely need to be outlined, as most often when it comes to parking spots, at least, we always round up because you can't require half a parking spot. You'll just need to do the whole parking spot. In this scenario, it may make sense to be a little bit more pointed of saying, well, if that percentage breaks on the lower half, we can round down. If it breaks on the higher half, but like Ruben said, if you break over the threshold, maybe you are rounding up. So if it were for a 4-unit development, maybe that does end up being 2 local units and 2 unrestricted units.
Or even if it's fractional at all, make it round up. I'm
Right.
in favor of that.
That's what I'm
Just
meaning.
to throw that idea there. Yeah.
And that's what we're between now, because I doubt we'd ever round down that all the way, but it'd either be a split or if it's an all the way round up. So those are good questions to involve where we should go with this.
Where are we at with proving localship? How does that work? Like employment, that they are workforce.
Right. So that would be defined within that active workforce definition. That was for the sake of the ADU ordinance, which would have accelerated that definition in advance of this resolution. But because the ADU ordinance did not come into effect yet, we don't have that quite defined. But what is basically taken right from the HDHO language in the county. So we're borrowing from the language that they've used to identify local in their terms of, I think it was owner, not in occupancy necessarily, but in ownership and occupancy. So it is defined out by a certain number of hours worked a week for a local company, your orientation within workforce in the community. But then there's also, of course, well, what if you're retired? So there were extensions for military, there were extensions for retirees, and then there were also debatably extensions for family members. We have determined we'd like to steer away from that because family member can get difficult, especially in land use code. There are so many definitions of that, which is why we stick to single household instead of single family. It doesn't matter. Unit is your unit. We're not going to define that, but in this case, it may not come into effect as much that family members like it did ADUs, where we are identifying specifically workforce. Basically, you gotta work here or live here full time to qualify as an occupant.
All right. Awesome. So this will be coming back, as always. Emails both to the whole commission, to Corey or Nora directly, are welcomed as you think of things, including questions. I like being able to kind of ponder over things a little bit outside of meetings too. So if anybody else functions that way, please feel free to email everyone and we can get a conversation going.
We have to be careful with that a little bit with the Open and Public Meetings Act, that we cannot be communicating, coordinating outside of an open, but you can communicate with me and then we can incorporate that into our understanding. So make sure that I think there are limits on how many people, but I think it'd just be safer to not have you guys coordinating, communicating in a collaborative way quite that way. So we can get with Summer about what that means, but feel free to contact us directly and then we can reach out to the Plan Commission and say, hey, Commission, here's what's on. That might be a little safer.
All right. What else do we have on our future agenda?
We a ton of site plan applications that are in right now. They're all working within DRT, and I know I've been saying that for weeks on end here. We do have some minor subdivisions which will be coming to you, some site plans, both commercial and residential. So a lot's in the works right now. They're just getting it prepared and completed with our development review team. So hard to say what's coming next, but it is a whole bunch.
How's the hotspot funding going?
I don't know if we've gotten a recent update beyond what was a couple weeks ago from our engineering department. Discussed that with city council. So I think they are out in that bid process right now, but I don't know where it has landed. In fact, it might have been 2 weeks ago they discussed it a little bit as far as dispersed parking specifically, that specific component of hotspot.
Lots to come. Lots to come.
Yep.
All right.
Get out and vote.
Yeah, everyone vote. Submit your ballots in the mail, but after tomorrow, it's probably safer to just drop them at City Hall. I think Monday or Tuesday, it's definitely safer to drop them at City Hall. Tuesday, you cannot mail your ballot. You must drop it off in person if you wait until then, which is election day.
So do it tomorrow.
Yes, I'll do it tomorrow. That's me.
Yeah.
And everyone watching, thank you. And please vote as well. All right. I now adjourn this, gosh, what is today? October 28th meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 7:16 p.m. Thank you everyone for good discussion. Thank you, Becky, for bearing with our technological impediments and making that work and providing input. That was all really
Kaya. And thank you for using your phone.
Happy to. All
Have a good
right.
night.
See everybody in 2 weeks.
All right.